Welcome to the podcast Working. I'm your host, Dan Doriani. The goal of this podcast is to fire the imagination of Christians who long to practice their faith at work. We do this primarily by interviewing people who have a story to tell about the way they practice their convictions as they work. Our guests may be famous or unknown, highly successful, or quietly faithful. We meet doctors, athletes, broadcasters, librarians, presidents, intellectuals, politicians, journalists, leaders of startups, and more. Today's guest is Joe Buck, an Emmy Award-winning broadcaster for Fox Sports, my friend, and a member of my church when I was a pastor. I'm glad to have you here, Joe, and I've known you for a while, followed your work for a while, and I'm just interested in the work of broadcasting. I'm just going to give a tiny bit of introduction in case people don't know. Here's a guy who's been broadcasting since he was 19, Major League Baseball at the age of 21, and then the big networks still in your 20s. And, awards are boring, but I am just going to say 7 Emmy Awards is pretty nice. And that's better than 1.
Right. Not as good as 8.
It's not as good as 8. It's like, if you had 1 for every finger, maybe, then you'd be done.
Then I would be really a jerk if I went around talking about Emmy Awards. But you got obviously the email I sent you that had to be mentioned at the top of the podcast.
Right. Well, no, I think what it means actually is longevity. And it means taking care to pursue your craft intentionally year after year, because one of the easiest things at work is to work hard and coast. And you don't seem like a guy who coasts.
I'm not. I'm starting to get to the age when you say that, I started it professionally in baseball. I was 19 in AAA and 21 with the Cardinals and 24 when I auditioned at Fox. I'm starting to get to the age now where I can actually look back and appreciate the hard work I've done. And I think when I got into broadcasting, there's no way that you can or should avoid the fact that you're somebody's son. In the case of my father, a Hall of Fame broadcaster many times over in different sports and what have you. And I think when I got into this business, I almost felt apologetic for taking somebody else's space that could have done it without having, whether you want to call it nepotism or a leg up or whatever you want to use. I think it doesn't qualify in the classic definition of nepotism, and I always joke about it, but it's there. And I'm not broadcasting AAA baseball at 19, mixing that into my college years if I'm not Jack Buck's son. I'm not broadcasting with the St. Louis Cardinals at 21 if I'm not Jack Buck's son. And I remember when I got hired, there was and he's still doing it, the TV critic in the St. Louis Post-Dispatch wrote an article that had in bold print, one of the paragraphs started with, "What's most offensive about Joe Buck?" And then it went apostrophe S, Joe Buck's hiring. Yeah. But all I saw was what's most offensive about Joe Buck. And I was 21, and I cried when I read that like a baby, and I was still living at home. And so I've always felt this terrible guilt of doing what I do. And now that I look back, and I have a daughter that's 24 and one that's 21, and I think about where they are in life, and I think about where I was back then, filling in these gigantic shoes, I think back and I go, man, I wasn't swallowed up by the moment, and I was up to the task, and for that, I'm really, really proud, and I'm just now getting there, and it's been a long, soul-searching kind of road to get to that point.
But there's no doubt that if we see our parents, in your case, your father, and my father was a public speaker, and I just noticed him standing up in front of people and having total ease. He was comfortable with his body, he was comfortable with his voice, he didn't get flustered, he was never nervous. And I've never been nervous. I mean, you have proper jitters, but so many people are terrified. And you saw your dad, you loved your dad, and you still do love your dad, he's not in this world, but loved and admired him. And so you picked up a lot with it just because you hung out with him. And then you have to add ability and interest to that. but something came from just being with your father.
If you think about how I grew up, I got a master's class from the time I was aware that man with the white hair was my dad. Mm-hmm. Forget when I'm 13, 14, 15, 16. When I was 2, I was in that broadcast booth, right. And there were things that I guarantee you I was taking in that I was not even aware of. And now, having gone through being a parent for the second time with young kids, you realize how fast and how aware they are yes. of things that are said. And so you read body language. You do read if somebody's enjoying what they're doing. You do read if somebody, even if you're 2, if somebody's at ease when they're sitting in front of this thing that I didn't know what it was, but it was right. a microphone. Mm-hmm. And so I saw all that. And I did an interview with a guy yesterday that was interviewing me for a baseball magazine, and he used to work for the Yankees. And he said, I sat there, your first World Series back in 1996, and I was 27 doing it, scared out of my mind. And he said, I just marveled. It sounded like you'd been doing it for years. And it was the most foreign thing to me when it first got underway, that first World Series. But I found a way to make it appear as if I was not nervous. And then sooner or later, my experiences caught up to where my central nervous system was. And then it evened out, and I was able to get better.
So one of the things you surely picked up is, how to handle it when things go wrong in the booth, which you saw your dad doing surely growing up. So I'll just tell you one for me.
Sure.
Before we started, we were talking about my grandkids, and I'll never forget the time I first saw my first son-in-law, and I was preaching at Central Presbyterian Church, and my daughter was sitting, row 7 as usual over there, and I'm giving my sermon to hundreds of people, and I noticed a guy sitting next to my daughter. And so I'm just, scanning. And then I noticed this guy is sitting definitely too close. And I don't know who he is. And who's this guy sitting almost next to my daughter whom I've never met? And I've got to give a sermon while trying to figure out who is this person?
Right.
Why is he sitting so close? And you got to make your mouth keep talking while you have these thoughts you're trying to put out. I know they're screaming in your ear.
Yeah.
Data, information, you got the name wrong, commercial break, whatever. So just tell me about that a little bit and how you learn to do that.
Well, when you're telling that story, it makes me realize that, and maybe this is just the way my mind has evolved. Now, if you talk to my sister, she can remember every detail from our childhood, and I cannot.
Right.
But I can sit here and talk to you, and I can have another track in my mind thinking about what's going on in the room. And I can also have that track work on how I want to get whatever I'm saying back to something else that's happening in the room. And that's a unique skill, and that's developed over time. Because if you are overwhelmed by whether it's your sermon or it's something going wrong, if you're overwhelmed by that, it's going to swallow you whole. But if you can kind of remove yourself from it, and to answer your question, yes, I saw things go wrong for my dad, but that was when he was at his best. That was when he was able to laugh at it. That was when he was able to turn a negative, which is something going wrong, into a positive, which became a light moment that people remember. Nobody remembers, oh my God, that was amazing how Jack Buck called a ground ball to Ozzie Smith at shortstop. It was, hey, did you hear what he said last night when somebody knocked a Coke over on him from behind? And that was me. I did that as a 3-year-old kid, knocking a Coca-Cola down onto my dad and Mike Shannon and everybody down below broadcasting. So I think that's really cool. And when people sit in the booth with me, and I've had people, just childhood friends, I've had people that are Hall of Fame rock musicians, I've had people that are in other parts of entertainment that sit in there and they go, how do you listen to that in your ear and not have it affect what's coming out of your mouth? And you're doing the same thing every day. So for you to have a thought or to have a moment where some kid is freaking out and that's when when I'm in a congregation and I'm watching you, or I'm watching somebody that I'm just in awe of how they're speaking, and somebody's making a lot of noise, or some kid is just crying, I'm like, how do they keep their concentration? But that's your training. And then you can sometimes weave that back in, and people remember that much more than just the mundane.
Yeah, I had a cell phone go off very loudly in the corner of the choir at a crucial, like the crescendo of the sermon, and the phone goes off, and I just said, and see, even the chimes of heaven are ringing, and everybody just broke up. I mean,
that's awesome.
What do you do?
But that's what you remember too. Like
right.
I remember, not that you might not remember even the gist of what you were saying that
right.
day.
Yeah.
But you remember that you were able to turn a moment that would have paralyzed some.
I mean, the person whose cell phone went off in the corner, so it was just amplifying through a very bouncy room. And
those are opportunities. That's how Terry Bradshaw at Fox, he's made a living out of taking a moment that is a mess,
yes,
and turning it into
something funny. So speaking of funny, before we started, I asked if you knew the name Bob Prince, and you said, yes, you do, because Bob Prince, who had a fantastic voice and was a very colorful guy, was your dad's best friend. So you got to tell the golf story.
So they were, my dad was the longtime voice of the Cardinals. Bob was the longtime voice of the Pirates, and there was a lot of mutual respect, and they were kind of cut from the same cloth. I believe Bob Prince was a veteran. My dad was a veteran who earned a Purple Heart in World War II, and they had kind of similar backgrounds, came from nothing and made it onto the radio and then took it from there. But they were playing golf one day in Pittsburgh, and my dad and Bob were having a good time, and Bob was kind of a salty guy, let's say, and they're playing behind a slow group, and Bob Prince just takes a moment to yell out to the group in front of him, "Hey, we don't have all day, hit the ball, And I'm sure they had a laugh about it. And then those people waved him up to play through him. And the person he was screaming at was Billy Graham. Which, I mean, of all the people that you could be screaming at and cursing at for playing so slow golf, and Billy Graham, I guess, just turned to Bob Prince and said, "Robert." And it was just, I'm sure, literally like the voice of God saying, that's not the way we treat our fellow humans, whether it's on a golf course or anywhere else.
And, Billy wasn't just a preacher, but he was actually an extraordinarily gentle man.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I just, that's one of those where you just want to dig a hole. And fortunately, you're near bunkers. You can just.
Yeah, you could just jump in a sand pit.
Jump in and just.
Yeah, you could do that. Let's just talk about a couple things from broadcasting for a minute. So broadcasters are sometimes famous for their calls, and you've gotten a call. The Red Sox won the World Series. The Cubs won the World Series after 487 years without winning anything. And, one thing I love about what you do, I mean, I know in your heart you hate the Cubs, but it never shows. And I know you can't.
Ask Cub fans. Ask Cubs. Go online and go Joe Buck, Chicago Cubs. See what comes up.
No, I mean, when you announced that World Series, no one would know that you were from St. Louis from the way you called it.
Right.
And that's professionalism, of course. It does get you in trouble with fans because, the Cubs win the World Series. Oh, you must hate,
Cleveland.
Right, exactly.
So then I hate Cleveland somehow, even though my dad's family's from Cleveland. So I had relatives that were cursing my name.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, I know where you're going with that. And it's kind of it's the path that I have to walk as the national guy.
Yes.
And if I'm looking to be loved, I'm in the wrong business, because I'm here to tell you, when you do baseball nationally, you're doing it in an entirely different way than fans for the local teams hear it all year on TV.
They're always hearing rooting for the home team.
Yeah, which is your job.
You clearly are not rooting for the home team.
I'm not rooting for either team.
Yeah,
but when you do a team's games, as I used to do for the Cardinals, if the Cardinals hit a home run, you're doing vocal handsprings.
Right.
If the Cardinals get a home run hit against them, you don't scream and yell about it. You say it as if it just ended your world. And, there's a difference with the way you call it. There's a difference with the way directors on a national broadcast direct a game and on a local broadcast. the local fans, if I'm doing a game for the Cardinals, they don't care about what's going on in the Mets farm system or the Mets bullpen or whatever. They just want to know what's going on with their team. So now you show up at the most critical time of year and you're screaming and yelling for the other team hitting a home run. Doesn't mean that makes me happy. But you always, so I have alienated every fan base by this point now. I've done 23 World Series, and pretty much every fan base has been involved that thinks that I don't like their team.
Yeah, right. Well, and of course, some people understand. I mean, professionals understand.
Correct.
And it's maybe people who care about their team a little too much that might possibly
the
not
bias is in
comprehend.
the ear of the beholder, not in the voice of the announcer.
Yeah, I mean, what I hear, because I mean, I know you and I know what you're trying to do. What I hear is you saying, that was a remarkable play. That was football. That was an unbelievable catch. I mean, there was a window of 3 inches where that ball had to go, and it got there, and he got it.
Yeah.
With his fingertips. And that's amazing whether you like the Ravens or not.
Right.
Right. But you have made some great calls. And since, we're here in St. Louis, 2011 World Series, and I got to attend a couple of the games in person, but the last two I watched. And so I heard you call them. And when it happened, when David Freese hit that home run in the 11th inning, I thought your call was perfect. We'll see you tomorrow night. And with a little bit of enthusiasm, but not like it's not over. There's still tomorrow night. And then the 7th, when they won, I don't know if you remember this, but you said, I wrote it down because I wanted to get it right. What a team, what a ride. And I thought 6 words, that captured it because, 5 weeks earlier, they weren't even going to make the playoffs. No. And they were always disfavored at every turn and did so well. So tell me, for those who care, walk us through how you make a call. Do you practice? Do you try them out? Do you just see what happens?
I learned a lot in the 1998 season when Mark McGwire was going for the home run record in the head-to-head with Sammy Sosa, and they're trying to, beat the 61 home runs by Roger Maris in 1961, a record that most people, if not all, in the game said, that'll never be broken.
Right.
No way. The pressure will be too much. It's one of the hallowed sports records, and the person will wilt. Well, once it was obvious that one of these two guys was going to break that record, and they went head-to-head, neck and neck that whole year, and it's a great documentary that ESPN did. And yes, this all comes with a disclaimer. We're all well more aware of what was going on behind the scenes.
Sure.
I get all that.
Yep.
But to me, that doesn't take away from the fun of watching these two guys chase down history. It just has to be put, with a little bit different lens on as you view it. But so when that year was going on, everybody would ask me, well, what are you going to say if he breaks the record? What's the home run call going to be? I'm like, I don't know. I don't know what I'm going to say. When I walk in the booth on a Super Bowl, I don't know what the first words out of my mouth are going to be. It's got to hit me in the moment. And if it doesn't hit me in the moment, then it doesn't feel like it's part of the moment. It feels like it's something that I wrote in my hotel room 3 days before. Right. And so when that year was going on, it was, what are you going to say? I don't know. What are you going to say? I don't know. After a while, enough people ask you, what are you going to say? And you go, well, maybe I need to start thinking about this. Yep. So I'd go to bed thinking about it, and then I'd wake up thinking about it, and then I'd try it out on friends of mine. And then, so now all the while he's getting closer, closer, closer. And the night he broke it, Fox preempted all their primetime programming. They ran the Cardinals-Cubs game live on national TV. It got an unbelievable rating, which just points out how important and enthralled a nation was to that home run chase. And I wrote down in my scorebook that morning, and I'll even tell you what the home run call was going to be. It was, what the beginning of it was irrelevant, but the gist of it was going to be, and Mark McGwire rounds the bases and enters the history books, or something to
like that. Something
corny, something that it shouldn't have been. But I wrote it down in my book. And so that night comes, and he hits it. Second at bat, I think, against Steve Traxel of the Cubs. And I'm sitting in the TV booth, and of all the home runs he ever hit, this one was a wall scraper.
Yeah, I mean, it was over the wall.
It was over the wall by 4 inches, and it was fair by about 9 inches.
Yeah,
It's
right.
just like this hooking line drive.
Yep.
And so I'm watching it as I'm on national TV. My dad and Mike Shannon are calling it on local radio. And that when you do a game like that, your concentration goes to a different level.
Right.
And I'm probably watching every rotation of the ball go down the line. And as that ball is hooking into the corner and I see it leave and the whole place erupts, I can never get my eyes down to this corny line that I had written.
Right.
So I had my eyes up watching the ball, and I saw out of the corner of my eye, he was watching the ball so much too that he leaped over first base
Had to go back and
had to go back and touch it. And then I said, touch first, Mark. You are the new single season home run king, which by the grace of God, that just came out.
Yeah.
Because you don't practice that part of the call.
Well, how could you know he was going to skip first base?
You have no idea. And so it made sense, and then I was quiet. And you watch him go around the bases. There's nothing that I'm going to say that is more exciting than hearing that crowd and seeing him, and who knew he would do this either, basically hugging everybody around the base paths.
Especially because he's not Mr. Warm and Fuzzy.
He's not warm and fuzzy. But I think Gaetti was the third baseman, and he had been his teammate. So there were pieces there that made sense. And then Sosa ran in, and he gave him a hug. And so all of that is a really long-winded way of me saying, when Freese hit the home run to force Game 7, I was not thinking, replicate your dad's home run call from almost 20 years prior to the day, because it's just going to be a tip of the cap to your dad, and it's going to be so fitting. I think Tim and I, McCarver and I had been talking about it. It was fresh in the back of my mind, and then it came out as I saw the outfielder react.
Right.
And it does set up the next game in very few words. And I'm always looking for the best summation of the moment in the fewest number of words.
Brevity.
Brevity is my friend, because the less brief you are, the more opportunity you have to make a mistake. I mean, just logically speaking.
Right.
So if I want to sit there and just go on and on and on, and, there are more traps in that. It's TV. Now, if I'm radio, different deal.
Talking more. Right.
But TV, that's not my job. My job is to state what happened, whether it's the Cubs winning for the first time in 108 years, or the Red Sox winning for the first time in 86 years, or whatever, or a pop fly into right to end the ninth inning. I just say it and have the guts and the security to just stop talking.
And trust the visual. I mean, the players show you how the event is playing out.
I don't know that people understand that a director in the TV production truck has a wall of monitors, and their artistry is picking to a technical director who's seated right to his right to say, ready 2, take 2. That guy punches 2. Now what is being shown in the camera number 2 is on your TV screen.
Right.
Ready 4, take 4. Ready 6, take, ready 18. In the case of a Super Bowl, ready 88, take 88. Well, I've called Super Bowls and I've called game-winning touchdowns and not said a word for over a minute.
Right.
And the reason I do that is because now it's the director's turn. Eli Manning throws a touchdown pass to Plaxico Burress, and they're going to beat the Patriots. Now the director goes to work. Eli happy, Plaxico Burress happy, Tom Coughlin, head coach of the Giants, beside himself. Bill Belichick, mad. Peyton Manning in a luxury box, thrilled because his little brother just probably won the Super Bowl. Fans reacting. Yeah. There's nothing I'm going to say that's better than our director doing what he does best, and that's teamwork.
It is TV after all.
Yes.
So you don't have to talk the
I
whole
feel like
time.
some people kind of forget that sometimes, but I'm on, I'm on a stage in a church, so I'm just going to leave names out of it.
Well, speaking of church, and so we talked about this one time. So I know that you prepare to broadcast the way a lot of speakers prepare. And I call it preaching in a mild state of panic, which is load up. My assumption basically is, if somebody said to me, Dan, instead of speaking, I'm a guest, instead of speaking 30 minutes today, you need to speak an hour. And I would say, fine, I'm ready. because I always have about twice as much to say as I could say in 30 minutes. But what that means is when I stand up, I've got 60 minutes worth of material, I've got 30 minutes. And so what I've done is load myself up with all kinds of information. And I have a few lines that I want to use, definitely. And before I get going, I forget where I'm going. Like the first 2 minutes, it takes me a while to get lubricated, and I'm looking at my notes a lot more. But then it's just like, okay, of all the things I could say, I'm going to say these things at this moment. I'm going to look at the end and say, oh, I forgot that great line I prepared or a point. But it was a real event. And I think that's the way you prepare too, because you got at a football game, how many players? 106?
Yeah.
And how many coaches?
Oh my!
Another
now
30?
In these days, I mean, when I started, and I'm.
But how many names do you have to learn? But
oh my gosh!
But you don't try to memorize. You just load yourself up and go spontaneously.
My Sundays or Thursdays are the great open book tests every week. And I don't know why we used to have those in high school, but we did. We had an open book test, which I guess tested your ability to need an answer and be able to go find it in a timely manner.
Right, exactly.
And I'm so thankful that we had those. You know, those, I think most kids would look at those those tests and go, that's a layup, you know, open book test. What do you mean? But if you
have to know the material enough,
you have to know the material. Otherwise, it's just a bunch of words.
Exactly.
You have no idea where to look. So I prepare the same way you do. And I use one of those old school Bic pens that has the things you push down for different colors. And the different colors say things to my mind when I'm in a mild state of panic, looking through this gigantic,
body of information.
A body of information. It's 2 11 by 17 cardboard stock pieces of paper that's spirally bound at Kinko's every week. And then the other is, it's defense, offense, and it's all right there in front of me. Anything I could possibly need to know is right there. Now the question is, can I find it?
Right.
And can I find it while I'm calling a live game and
they're
in my ear and whatever. So now you have to prioritize. And prioritize, obviously, if it's red colored, I'm getting that in. And if it's green colored, maybe I'll get there.
If
probably
a slow
won't.
injury timeout,
then there's something that I can
replay.
go to.
Right.
Or if, this guy just made the play of his life. I can give a snippet of his life story because I've done that preparation.
This is his 7th game.
But probably the bigger the game, the less of that you get into, unless it's a blowout. If it's a blowout, you're going to walk away with 80% of it spent. If it's not, you're probably going to spend about 20%.
Because you're in the moment all the time.
You're in the moment. And anything that I've written down, you deal in history and the present, but you're highlighting history. Anything that I'm going to say has already happened.
Right.
People are tuning into today's or tonight's game, and that's nobody's ever seen it.
Right.
Nobody's got any notes on it.
Right.
So I have to cover now. And if something from then fits now, then it's good.
Yeah.
But don't force it to show people that you did your homework.
Right.
That's should be baked in, and nobody cares.
So, and we've talked about this at least one time. We're not the only ones, that is to say broadcasters and public speakers aren't the only ones who kind of approach it that way. So I remember when I was early in my public speaking career, with fascination, listening to an interview of an actor. And they were saying, let's say I've got, let's say it's Robert De Niro. Just somebody, maybe not that big, but a serious actor who doesn't know everything, but they're beloved. And he said, okay, so we do our takes. We're doing 12 takes of the scene. And he said, I tend to think that take number 5 is the best, but actually it's number 4 or number 3. Because it's in number 5, I'm trying to remember how I spontaneously found the way to say the line in 3 or 4, and I'm trying to replicate that so it's just a little bit dead. It's a little bit canned. And then I was hanging out with a student of mine who is a session musician in Nashville, and he was talking about the process of putting together a song where you have the music, the lyrics, and a basic sense of what you want it to sound like, but you haven't charted it out totally. Everybody's a pro. Most of them have worked together before, and they're going like, I want this sound. Let's do a little bit faster, a little bit faster. Oh, that's too fast. And then maybe take 6, all of a sudden, everybody says, this is it. We found it.
Right.
And they're prepped, but they're not over-prepped. They're pros, but they're also finding their way. And that's where life is. At least that's the way I take it.
It's well said, and it points out to me why I like live so much. I would much rather, even though it's more dangerous, and in today's world, more dangerous than it's ever been to be in front of a live microphone.
Yes.
I would rather have it be true to the moment and let it go and let it happen than trying to be perfect.
Right.
And what you said about the acting part of it, I've heard that same thing. And Larry David, who's a great improv comedian, obviously, he and I were talking about it, and he's a huge sports fan. And he said, we were having the same type conversation. And his take on it was, that's why we do my show Curb Your Enthusiasm, where we give Richard Lewis, the different characters that they've got there. I think Vince Vaughn is on it now, whatever. We give them an outline, but we do not give them lines, and we do not give them what we hope to be a funny moment. It's just got to happen. And he said, if I wake up in the morning and I say, in that scene today where I go into the coffee shop and I don't have enough money for a tip, but I want to make sure that the person sees me throw which I do all the time. Like, just so you know, I am throwing something in here. If I wake up with that thought, it's almost like I have to shove it out of my head because the whole time I'm doing the scene, I'm thinking, how am I going to get there?
Right.
And then you're missing other things.
Right.
You're missing the interaction with really great people, and that's the same thing for me. If my head is buried, I remember my dad, Kelly Chase, the blues player, was starting his broadcasting career. And my dad went up to the booth, and they were friends. And Kelly was a guy my dad could call on to make an appearance with him at the 2nd Police District luncheon or whatever it was. And Kelly goes, Jack, look at all these notes I've got, and I've been working so hard. And my dad went, let me see those. And he took me, threw them out.
I figured that's what you were
saying. And he said, you've played enough hockey.
Call the game.
Just call the game.
Yeah.
And that's the best advice I could give anybody.
Yeah.
Just do it.
Right. Which probably applies, this is a broadcast on faith and work. And so it's work. It's the name of it is just work, which means two things. Just go to work, do your work, which is what we're talking about now, but also justice in your work is supposed to be behind it as well. But I think a lot of people just need to do their work and maybe think about it a little bit less. But
I think you can get, I'm cutting you off, but I think you can get exposed if you haven't. And that's what leads people to overdo it in the moment. If you know you've done your work, if you know you're prepared, you can let it come to you.
Right.
But when you're trying to play catch up because you haven't prepared properly, that's when you miss. Insight.
So what I hear you saying, I'm going to tease this out a little bit.
Yeah.
What you're saying is the person who doesn't always do their work wants to show their work when they've done it, and they get in trouble. If you're constantly doing your best, given life has its vicissitudes, you're doing the best you can. You're always prepared. You don't have to show off that you're prepared.
That's exactly right. And I say that when kids ask me, and I say kids now, 18, 19, 20, 25-year-olds, young people in the business, how do you prepare? How do you do your work over here? Be confident in it. Don't short yourself.
Right.
At the same time, don't overload yourself so that you're paralyzed by information. Find that balance and then be willing to leave that behind and then go do your work. Go do your job in the moment. And you said it perfectly. You're going to get exposed if you haven't done the work. And it's that person that wants to show that they're not exposed that in a roundabout, ironic way, ends up exposing the fact that they haven't done the work as opposed to somebody who's confident and they can just be themselves.
Yeah. So I just officiated my daughter's, middle daughter's wedding 3 days ago, which is awesome. And I probably never worked so hard. I don't want her to hear this. I probably never worked so hard on a talk in all my life. I just wanted it to be perfect. And I had 4 drafts. And in the final draft, I had all these great lines that I didn't use because I didn't want to keep talking. I mean, I think it was a good meditation. People were, with me, and we laughed. and it was wonderful. So I just grabbed them, like 2 days later. I said, okay, here are the things I forgot to say. I just spent time. But I was okay with not saying all these things that I wanted to say, because it would have taken away from the moment again. If I'd been buried in my notes, I got to make point 4, right?
Well, you have to feel where you are in the room, too.
Yes.
And I would imagine whether you're giving the sermon of your life, you have to know when enough's enough.
Yes.
And you can go on and on and on, and then it becomes people get, and I'm not talking about people's, busy lives and all that,
right.
But you lose the power of the point because you're just beating it into the ground. And my dad said that to me when I started broadcasting, and a young guy that I was working with that had never broadcast before, and I was like, Dad, what do you think of this guy? And this person wouldn't mind me saying his name, Tim Green, who's dealing with ALS, and was as smart a person, a lawyer, valedictorian of his class at Syracuse, first-round draft pick, and an author. He's written 25 books.
Perfect credentials.
Unbelievable. But he would make a point, and then he'd go back to the point, and then he would conclude with the point. And he said, Tim would say, what does your dad think? And I said, do you really want to know? Live with what first comes out of your mouth and let it sit there. You don't need to keep explaining it, because you're losing the power of the description, or you're losing the power of your insight by just overdoing it. And there's something there. So,
relatively speaking, you have to pour things out line by line, repeat yourself when you're with 3-year-olds, 5-year-olds, 7-year-olds, 9-year-olds. When you're with adults, they want you to show that you trust them to finish or interpret the thought, which is what that's one of the things I like about you as a broadcaster, candidly. You make a point, you don't repeat it. One of my favorite, I wish I could remember the details, but somebody was saying that, this brand new, gigantic, graphic light display in some stadium you could park 18 tractor trailers on it. And you said, well, I'll take the under on that. So you spoke for everybody. Right. Really, 18 tractor trailers?
Right.
It was.
You're talking about Dallas. You're talking about Jerry Jones.
Even if it's true, it isn't true. Nobody should say you can park 18 tractor trailers on a screen,
that's
on a
right.
board.
No, but that's exactly what it was. And again, I think the adults, even if you could park 18, the adults wanted you to. The adults are delighted to put a pin
that you said that for them.
To pop the little.
Yeah, pop the bubble.
Yeah,
and hey, Randy Arozarena, you made a little comment in the World Series.
Yeah.
And it may turn out to be a fine trade for the Cardinals, right? But you had to say something.
You had to.
Even if you knew it might not be true, you had to say something, and you did.
I did, because, obviously, if you want to go into sports talk, we can. The point is, somebody in the organization found this kid.
Yep.
He was a soccer player. He'd played very little baseball. He was of Cuban descent. He defected. He got into kayak, went to Mexico, was playing soccer, played some baseball. Somebody in the organization gave this kid $1.5 million
right.
and said, he's got a chance to be really great.
Right.
And then as he made his way up the minor league system, he hit.
Yep.
And he gets to the big leagues after, I think he hit like 370 in AA, his final full year with the Cardinals. And they never really gave him a shot. And he was the guy that Tampa Bay wanted all along. So you have to give the Cardinals credit on one hand for finding this kid on an open field with hundreds of guys running around. They gave him $1.5 million. And then you have to go, well, what got missed between entry and exit of the organization, and Tampa Bay wanted him.
How angry that scout is.
Those scouts have to be livid, and I'm sure they deal with that, and they live in that. But somebody's got to go, I found this kid, and now he's going to make Tampa Bay look amazing. And, they've given up their rights to him, and this kid was, all you had to do was watch him take batting practice one time. And so I texted with somebody in the Cardinal organization when this kid was going crazy in the LCS. And that person said, well, the left-hander we got, the minor league left-hander we got better be Randy Johnson.
Yeah.
And then later, as the guy hits a home run in game 6, I think, or game 5, I said, well, watching that'll make everybody in the Cardinals front office turn off their TV. Because he's, he just set one record after another, and he's a rookie.
Well, so let me ask you this, sort of Christian principles. You got to, one of the big teachings in the Bible about speech is speak the truth in love, right? So you got to speak the truth. You're a broadcaster, but you got to speak the truth without hurting people.
Right. That's the hard thing to. That's a hard thing to walk.
So I told you I was going to ask you this question. What if you have the Cardinals outfield, I have nothing but respect for them as individuals, but they struggled badly this year. I mean, great catch,
sure.
Great fielders, great base runners, but you're kind of paid to hit the ball hard, and that wasn't working out. And then we got people like Rosarena,
and Luke Voigt,
exactly.
Marcelo Zuna.
The
list goes on.
Yeah. So, but what if it's somebody even you like a shortstop, let's say, or a third baseman, second baseman, who's a good guy, and he's a good interview, and he works hard, and he doesn't get proud when the day's going well, and he doesn't think about hanging himself when the day's going poorly.
Right.
But you kind of have to say, this guy's really struggling. How do you do it? How do you speak the truth respectfully or lovingly?
I think it's a great question, and it's hard to answer honestly, and I will always be honest with you here or anywhere else. I think that's the most difficult part of my job. I remember my dad dropping me. He and I got into the car when I was 19, and I was going to start that year at AAA. And we were driving from St. Louis to Florida for spring training. And he said, you've watched big league baseball your entire life, and now you're going to be behind a microphone talking about these guys. And unless you think you personally could make that play that guy just didn't make 10 times out of 10, realize how hard it is what they're doing right now. And they didn't try to make an error. They didn't try to not hit. These guys are trying their lights out. This is their craft. This is how they're making their mark in the world on one hand. And that always rings in my head. So I don't think I'm ever really hypercritical, but even with friends, and I'm not friends with a lot of these guys anymore. When I started, I was 21. I was the same age as a lot of these guys. I was in the minor leagues with a lot of them. I was on bus trips with them. I was on planes with them. I was checking into hotels at 3 a.m. with them after a long road trip or whatever it might be. And you get to know them on a personal level, and really it gives you a little bit more insight because this guy's wife's really sick and they've got twins on the trip and the guy's just frazzled or whatever it might be. You have way more information. But now when you see somebody struggling, the word struggle, I think, is the perfect word because that's exactly what it is. It's a struggle to get to the big leagues, and it's probably more of a struggle to stay there. And these guys are fighting every day with the negative voice in their head, with the press that's on them, with the fans that are booing them openly in a stadium.
Maybe a coach is saying,
you better figure this out,
or you're
gone. We got 10 guys that can strike out with the bases loaded. Whatever it is, I'm aware of all that. So I don't think I've ever gone beyond, boy, he's really struggling, unless a guy doesn't hustle, unless a guy hits a ground ball to the shortstop and the shortstop drops it, fumbles it, picks it up, and still gets the guy by 8 feet because he wasn't running.
Right.
And effort shouldn't ever slump. And if a guy is not giving a real effort, that's one thing. And I think that needs to be called out. Or otherwise you don't have any, then I lose my credibility. I remember I've only been told one time that I was too critical, and it was when I was a young guy with the Cardinals. And the Cardinals were out of it, and they had this left-handed pitcher, Donovan Osborne.
Yes.
And he he'd just been called up, and he was probably in the sixth
Isn't it
inning.
funny, by the way, he's named after two musicians.
Yes.
I mean, that just must hurt when you're having a bad day.
Yeah, exactly. And then weren't they kind of like flower children, like Donovan or whatever?
Well, yeah, right. Anyway, go ahead.
But so he was struggling, and the Cardinals had just fired, I think it was Joe Torre maybe, whoever it was. They had an interim manager, Mike Jorgensen, who was my AAA manager when I started at broadcasting at Louisville. And he comes out to take him out with a game on the line in the sixth inning. And I said something like, well, if you're not going to find out now, when there's really nothing hanging in the balance,
right.
if he can get through this troubling spot, then when are you going to find out? Because there's no stakes. So
that was considered offensive?
Yeah, I got called by Mark Lamping of the Cardinals, who was then the team president. And I think because Jorgensen heard about it, complained to Lamping. Lamping went to me. And all I said was this, and I believed it then, and I believe it now.
It's almost obvious.
It's obvious. It's a nothing point. It's not really that critical.
Right.
But Jorgensen didn't like it because it made him look bad. But I think the bigger point is, when you're sitting there in the mic, especially when you're a team's announcer, if you're not going to be honest with people when it's not going well or when it's not looking that rosy, they're not going to believe you when it is.
Listen, if your AAA team is loaded every year, we got a lot of stars coming up. Hey, and our record is 63-99 for the fourth year in a row. You've lost your credibility. Yeah,
absolutely.
So let me switch gears a little bit. One of the questions I'd like to ask in this podcast is, you could take either one of these. You've kind of answered one of them. What do you think your unique skill is? Or you can do both if you want to. Or what is there that you've learned about the world because you do what you do that you would never have learned otherwise?
They kind of go hand in hand for me.
They can, yeah.
I think what I've learned about the world that I probably wouldn't have learned when I come off a World Series or I come out of a Super Bowl or whatever it might be. And I kind of get back into the day-to-day real world of St. Louis. And I'm talking to my sister, and she's talking to me about a Facebook post, or she's talking to me about something that somebody put up on Instagram or whatever it might be. I think what I've learned is, unless you've been the target of a lot of the negativity on social media, you almost look at it like it's just people are things.
Yes.
They're not humans. And so when it's you, you realize, that guy, he just said something to me on Instagram or even in a stadium. I've had people say some of the nastiest stuff to me, to my face, like, wait, what? Like, this guy's standing down there with his son, or this guy's there with his wife, and the wife just said something to me. And I'm thinking, in any other circumstance, would you say that to another
you're not
person?
A human being.
Because I'm not to them.
Right.
And so when you see the Kardashians, or you see, and they are creatures of what they've created.
Well, yeah, they don't exactly want to be.
They don't really want to be people.
Yeah, they're a projection of an image
a thing.
Somehow connected to who they are.
But when somebody's giving an honest effort, or if somebody's just released a new album and it's not well received, or you don't like it, you go on there and you say, this is the worst piece of junk I've ever read. Somebody theoretically could be, otherwise, why are you writing that? To be seen by the other commenters and to be piggybacked on or to be applauded for your nastiness or whatever it is. So I think what I've learned is in the group setting, and this is no news flash, people are nasty. In the one-on-one, interpersonal, people are really good. Yeah. And I am lifted up by people's interactions and things that are said, gestures that I see, gestures I try to make in the response to them, things that I see at a grocery store, things that I see at a gym, things that I see in a mall, whatever it is, that I think, you know what? I have a lot more hope for humans and humanity than I sure as heck would if I just lived like some people seem to be through social media. And so I'm a lot more optimistic of where we are as people inhabiting this earth than maybe some are. And maybe I'm more aware of it because I see the terrible side of it too.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that exactly answers the answer. So what am I good at? I'm good at putting that in its place. I'm good, and I am bothered by it. If somebody says I'm the worst announcer they've ever heard, or thank God you had a famous dad, or you'd be, flipping hamburgers or shoveling trash, or whatever. And nothing against what people who flip hamburgers or shovel trash do. I mean, whatever. Everybody's got their own thing in life. And it affects me. I'm good with when that first pitch or that kickoff happens, putting it over here and being my best.
Michael Jordan said that he loved to be on the court because it was the only time he could just be himself, be a basketball player. Nobody wanted anything from him, except his teammates wanted him to play well, but it's just normal.
Yeah.
And maybe that's touching on what you're saying a tiny bit. I'm just going to tell you one thing. One time, once in a great while, I'll defend people when they make egregious remarks. And I was near somebody who didn't like a comment you made in a football game. And they just didn't think it was the most brilliant and helpful comment ever.
Okay.
And I kind of lit into him a little bit. I surprised myself. I said, you understand, of course, that he has to talk for 3 hours, and he's got information flying at him, and he's got to know the names of well over 100 people instantaneously, and he's got to know the storylines of all these people or be ready to talk about it, and he may have as many as 2 different voices talking to him simultaneously in his headphones, and you're going to critique that he made one comment about one play that was a little bit obvious or banal?
Right.
And he kind of stopped. I said, this is a person announcing his game in real time with real pressure. Do you make nonstop brilliant remarks for 3 hours straight? I came on way too strong. And he's like, what happened to you? And I said, well, I do know Joe Buck. But
well, thank you. Thank you for defending me.
And he was cowed. I mean, it was what you're talking about. I mean, it was like, I'm going to impress a room of 10 people that I can make a critical remark about the broadcaster. And I just said, he's a human.
Well, thank you. And it's funny. I've had personal interactions with that. I've had that where people don't know I'm there.
Right. Yes.
And I was in a bathroom in Green Bay, and for some reason, everybody in Green Bay thinks we don't like the Packers, which is mind-blowing to me, because all we do is talk about the greatness of Aaron Rodgers.
It's hard to dislike the Packers.
And whether it's Brett Favre or Aaron Rodgers, all we've done is throw bouquets at them.
And they're so exciting.
Yeah, there's nothing not to love.
Yeah.
And I was in the bathroom, and this kid walks out of the bathroom. Now, he claimed after the fact that he didn't know I was in there. He walks out of the bathroom, and my last name rhymes with a lot of words that you probably shouldn't say.
Some of them aren't the nicest words.
Right.
Yep.
And he said, Joe Buck, Sucks, as he walked out. And I've never finished going to the bathroom faster in my life.
Yeah.
I went outside and said, hey. And he stopped. And the minute you pop that little bubble of anonymity and like all of a sudden.
I'm a human, you're a human.
I'm a human, you're a human.
Right.
I said, what'd you say? And I'm not looking to fight. In fact, if anybody ever did fight me, I would lose. I'm not a fighter. I'm terrible. I'm not tough. I'm not strong. But I said, what did you say? Well, I didn't know you were in there. I said, oh, okay. You just randomly shout that out at different times during the course of the day? I said, just so you know, I'm a person.
Right.
Oh, well, and then his friend came out, and his friend said, hey, you know what? A friend of mine just told me that this guy, meaning me, bought tickets to an NFL game for wounded veterans, and my cousin was one of them, and said this guy made it the weekend of a lifetime for them, which I had done. And that was so random because it had just happened.
The juxtaposition of the two.
It was from my children's hospital tournament, and that just happened. And it's not something that would ever be said in any other time, really. And the guy's like, is that right? oh, well, I'll defend you now forever. It's like, I don't even want that. All I want you to come away from this knowing is I'm a person.
Yes.
And so is the guy that just dropped the pass that broke your heart, and you feel you're going to boo and you suck and all that.
Or got the count wrong. I mean, how can you mess up a false start? You know what? It's possible.
It's possible. How did Tom Brady forget that it was 4th down and not 3rd down?
And it's possible.
People make mistakes. That's kind of baked into the process.
That's why you actually play the game instead of having computers.
That's right.
Play each other.
So it's funny you say that, and there have been other situations where I've just been like, I'm right here, and then they're like, all of a sudden the tune changes. Oh, I love you, man. You're great. Okay, got it.
Yeah. Well, it does happen. Anybody who's a public figure gets that, of course. And the way I get it, nothing compared to you, of course, but when I post blogs on controversial topics, I mean, it's just amazing the things. And once in my life, I commented on a comment that somebody made about this moron, Dan Doriani, who actually believes this idiotic idea.
Melt. If I made a comment about you, you saw it and you responded to me, I don't even know that I would have the guts. First of all, I wouldn't do it.
No, of course you wouldn't.
But I wouldn't have the guts to even open the comment.
Well, the point is, I just said, they just drew a series of conclusions. And then, eventually I said, it's possible that you actually didn't read what I wrote. Did you just react to the title? And they said, yeah, I just read one sentence and just started attacking you as a human.
Which says more about them.
Of course it does.
And so, we just had a thing in Tampa Bay. So Aikman and I, before, this is kind of in the weeds too, but it became a national thing. Aikman and I before we go on TV, we do a stand-up where that's the one time you see us.
Yep.
And it's awkward. I don't care how many years you've done it. Al Michaels is the best ever. When he's on camera, it's awkward.
Yep.
And so you're going to come on, hey, welcome to the broadcast booth. It's the Tampa Bay Buccaneers against the Green Bay Packers, and it's all fake and phony and whatever. So before you go on in front of 18 million people, you're talking into the mic to our entire production crew. Right. All of us have been together for basically 18 years now. Okay. I would consider myself conservative. Mm-hmm. I'm definitely to the right of center, which I never talk about. I'm happy to talk about it.
Politically, you mean now?
Politically.
Yeah, right.
Politically, just
You're
whatever. Socially,
I'm
a conservative guy. I'm not a wild guy. I'm not, or whatever. Doesn't matter. Everybody's got their own beliefs. But I would say that I probably default to most issues just to the right of center. Aikman is beyond right, and all you have to do is look at his social media posts, and you know that for 2 seconds. So somebody steals a piece of us talking into the mic to our crew. They're talking to us in our ear, but you don't hear that. They don't have microphones. Right. We're responding to it, watching a flyover in front of over the top of a stadium that's maybe got 10,000 people in it now during the time of COVID and isn't being covered on national TV. Mm-hmm. And Aikman repeats into the microphone what one of our close, dear friends, who's probably more left of center, had said at a dinner before, saying, well, if Trump loses, you're not going to see that. Nobody involved in that conversation cares about any of it, really. Mm-hmm. I have seen some of the most chill-inducing, magical flyovers. I love flyovers. Yeah, personally, I love it. I've seen the stealth bomber come over a stadium. I've seen these things that just go, wow. And for somebody that, like me, that grew up with a dad who was in World War II, who was just mesmerized by paratroopers. That was his one, he's like, and he jumped out of a plane on his 75th birthday just to say that he had done it before he died, because he was down there on the ground watching these guys fly through the air. And he's like, that's the most amazing thing I've ever seen. So I see these things, it kind of touches a part of me. So it gets sold as if we're saying flyovers are bad. Mm-hmm. If you put Sony and Penethol into Aikman and me, we would tell you flyovers are probably part of the coolest piece of any game we cover. Mm-hmm. But it gets pumped out over the internet with people not knowing any of the context.
Right.
And then it becomes like attack. So we've got to get to a place, which is not my intention of, I never talk about this stuff, where people can have a differing views, and it doesn't mean that it's just batten down the hatches and we are going to war. I mean, I don't know what's going on where open dialogue on things, or people can't laugh or at anything. It's scary to me, that part of it.
I want to switch to something positive.
Okay, please do.
You get to do, I want to be candid. We're being candid. You get to raise money for a children's hospital. That's probably something you couldn't do if you were the CFO of a, food company.
Right.
No, even if you were the best CFO in the region, you're probably not going to get to do that.
But I'd go. I'd be a paying customer.
You would go. You might have a great time, but you get to host it, and a lot of money has gone to kids in need. Just say a word or two about that. Why do you do that? Is it just sheer joy? You just want to love people who are disadvantaged?
I mean, yeah, it gets me, because it really taps into who my dad was. It gets me emotional even thinking about it, because my dad, even when he was at his sickest, in the hospital for the final 7 months of his life, he went in, the day he went into the hospital and was on the outside of the walls of Barnes Hospital, he did a speaking engagement that day and signed off on posters that were going to raise money for Matthews Dickey Boys and Girls Club.
Right.
That was, and he had lung cancer at that time. He went in and he raised money for cystic fibrosis. You talked about seeing my dad never nervous. Well, he tells a story when he first came to St. Louis as a kid from Ohio, and he's trying to make his mark. He did every speaking engagement he could find, and his knees were shaking behind the podium, and eventually that went away, and he was so ingrained into this community. That's why when he passed away, it was an event. It was an event, and people are stopping on the highway with the hearse going by.
Right.
So all that's a long way of saying this. 22 years ago, my daughter Natalie got a blood test back that said that she had juvenile diabetes. And I remember the pediatrician, who has since retired, most brilliant, loving man, Dr. Plax, said, I just don't believe that's the case. But we're going to go down to Children's Hospital and we're going to run it again. And this was coinciding with a time where she was acting a little funny, and they said, well, we're going to check her for cystic fibrosis. And my dad had raised money for cystic fibrosis for decades at that point. And I told my dad that at a banquet. This is not at the same time when he was going to the hospital. And he said, she doesn't have cystic fibrosis.
Right, because he'd seen people with
He'd seen people with it. I said, I understand that, Dr. Buck, but just to be sure, the people at Children's Hospital want to check her for cystic fibrosis. She doesn't have cystic fibrosis. I'm telling you, kid. Don't worry about it.
Right.
When's the test? I said, it's at 11:30. And then we're going to check her blood for this juvenile diabetes thing. He said, you don't have to worry about it. Well, 11:30 came the next day, and my wife and I are sitting there with Natalie, our daughter, and through the front door of the hospital is my dad. And he was in his 70s and was not in the best of health. And he sat there with us the entire time during the sweat test, which they give you for cystic fibrosis. And I'm looking at these trains going around and these fish tanks, and these doctors and these nurses and these healthcare givers, and I'm just blown away by the heart that's in that place. And that's not unique to Children's Hospital. That's Cardinal Glennon. That's any hospital. Any hospital. It doesn't matter.
Almost any hospital. Anyway.
Yeah. And I said to myself, and thankfully both tests came back positive in a good way. And I said, if I am ever in a position to help this place, that's what I'm going to put my name to.
Yeah, good.
And so here we are 20 years later, and it's gone directly to the imaging center, which is where kids get MRIs and CAT scans, and it's an intimidating thing for not just the kids, but for the parents.
Yes.
And trying to make that as welcoming and as tried to make it look like a baseball stadium and different, cross sections of a baseball glove, and trying to make it, put video games in there. That is one of the most important things I've ever put my name to. It's no different than my dad making that speech after 9/11 and reciting a poem that he'd written. And I was like, Dad, you realize everything you've done in your life has led you to this incredible amount of credibility that means that you delivering that meant something to people. And for everything you've been through, it kind of culminates in this moment. And so you're right. I mean, I don't say that other stuff about social media and everything to be negative, but I think it's a piece of it. But the overall puzzle is beautiful, and there's nothing I want to do more than go do a game.
One of my convictions is the course of your life interprets everything you say. And if people care about you enough to just watch how you conduct yourself, then your life interprets what you've done. So if you made a slip of speech, I remember I said something in a sermon once, and it was about parenting. And a woman I really respected, I was quite young, came up to me and said afterward, you said this, and I would have been pretty unhappy with you, but I've seen you with your kids. And I just thought, number one, she's right, I didn't say that well. I did make it easy to misunderstand what I was saying. I didn't qualify it. I probably did offend people, but what a woman.
Yeah.
To make that comment. I mean, she knew that she was gently, I was probably 30 or 29. She knew she was correcting me, or even, you might say, rebuking me gently for careless speech. But she was also making it very clear, I do know you, and I know your kids, and I love you and your kids. And so I'm going to give you the credit to not misunderstand what you said. So I think, I'm reflecting obviously on your dad.
Yeah.
And on you, and on actually anybody who, tries to live a life of love and respect. We all err. That's why, we're filming in a church. Well, that's why we need churches, We all err. We all need grace. We all need God's forgiveness. And we hope that the course of our life, including errors, leads to a level of respect and understanding as we try to live with dignity and kindness to the people around us.
I mean, that's just a beautiful teaching moment for you, to get feedback that is constructive.
Yes.
And I don't know that the other examples are not always constructive.
No, it takes time to
feedback.
Say it to get really good help, doesn't it? To give good help.
And for people to give you the benefit of the doubt of knowing where a comment is coming from.
Right.
But you deal in first of all, you're preaching to a congregation, and people are there with similar, for the most part, similar ideals.
Right.
And so, but you're also dealing with things that are really personal and really hard to navigate and really easy to inflame somebody's, even if it's not intended.
No, that's right.
And so I'm doing a game to certainly not a congregation. I'm doing it to people.
A very diverse group of people.
Much entirely more who don't know anything about me, who don't know. And so
they don't know that you do charity work, for example, or that you're a loving dad and husband.
Yeah, I would like to hope that when I die, the main thing that anybody says about me is about the children that I helped bring into the world and how I tried to help anybody that needed help that I could conceivably aid. And beyond that, if they think I don't like the Packers, or if they think I'm rooting against the Cubs, all that stuff is so fleeting.
And we know you are rooting against the Cubs.
Yeah, sure, yes, obviously. But I remember my dad being in intensive care, and him laying there, saying, and it would be like Picasso having his fingers cut off, as opposed to other things,
right?
Where he couldn't. My dad's voice was gone because he had a trach.
Yep.
And so they had to, quote unquote, drop the trach cuff or whatever that goes down to make a noise, but it still didn't really sound like him. Yep. And so for the most part, we didn't even bother with that. I knew what he was saying because I could read his lips.
Right.
And I will never forget him saying, I hope, and he's mouthing this all to me, I hope that me laying in here for as long as I've laid in here teaches you that when you get to this point, it's too late. Live your life, have your fun, be a good person, because it's going to be over at some point.
And your dad was also a man of faith too, not just live a good life.
For sure. Yeah. I think faith drove him to do all that he did. He definitely was a man of faith. He definitely went through a lot. And I think any kid that grew up in the Depression saw things in this country and then saw death and was a part of a world war and was shot. And, he had life experiences that make my existence seem trivial. So that's who I studied at the foot of, and that's who I witnessed. And he paved every path for me in his own way, and as did my mom. And so, again, it goes back to what I said. The first thing I said about anything on this podcast was kind of that guilt that seeps in. Yeah. But it's a good guilt because it comes from a good place, that I was lucky to have parents that gave me a perspective that allows me to, A, appreciate all that I have, and B, not consider myself any different than I would be if I was doing anything else in life.
So we're going to go to lightning round in a second here, but I just want to agree with you and say it a slightly different way. At weddings, again, one of the things that I think we're supposed to feel is thank God that of all the people in the world, he gave me this person.
Yeah.
And we're also supposed to think simultaneously, in all the world, this is the person who wanted to be married to me with all my flaws. This person actually thinks it's worthwhile to marry me. And God gave you good parents. And you can look at it as lucky, or you can look at it as maybe feeling guilty, but God gave you good parents. I mean, I didn't really know your dad. I knew your mom.
Sure.
He gave you good parents. And that's just a gift that keeps giving.
And unique parents. I mean, they met at a weird time.
Both very talented, if I may say so, not just your dad.
Yeah, no, my mom was and is in her own way. She can stand up and talk to a crowd. She can sing. She did stuff in New York and here that I can't do. So I got just as much from her. But I saw a loving marriage that made for an example that was hard to match up to and follow in my own life when I was a younger guy, because I just saw this really well-oiled machine of two people that had fun and made it work as much as my dad traveled. And now it's like, well, what's going on here? I mean, why are we not being perfectly in tune with one another? And then, it was... So it's, the more I get around and the more people I meet and the more stories I hear of where people come from and what they've had to deal with, I'm just so thankful that I come from whence I come.
Yeah. Are you ready for a lightning round?
Yes, because I have to go to the bathroom.
Okay.
So let's go.
What is one book that changed your life?
A Prayer for Owen Meany.
Okay. Yeah. That's a serious book.
I loved it. It was so good that I saved one page a day.
Yes, I know what you mean. A really
I didn't want
book.
it to end.
I'll read it like 3 or 4 pages and I'd put it down.
Yeah, because I want to be able to look forward to going back to it.
Yeah. Try Jaber Crow. It might give you the same feeling.
Okay.
Yep. Okay, number 2. What do you do to play or relax?
Golf, but at this point with the twins, when they're down, they're bathed, they're down, they're asleep and quiet.
Yeah.
And I can sit on the couch with my wife and watch mindless television. Nothing gives me greater joy.
What's your favorite mindless TV show then?
Well, it just depends.
Just right now, right now.
A show called Away on Netflix.
Oh, I saw a little bit of that, yeah. It's an unusual show.
It's an unusual show.
Yeah.
It's about a mom who leaves.
It's bad. It's just different.
No, it's different. It's about 2 astronauts. The mom's leaving on a trip to Mars for 3 years, and her daughter's, at a very tough time in her life.
Yeah. It's when I said unusual, it wasn't a subtle way of saying it's terrible. I like it.
Ted Lasso.
Yeah.
Another
Ted
good
Lasso,
one,
yeah.
Which is great and heartfelt and not really.
Also different.
Also different. But you don't see it coming. And then at the end, you're like, oh, I love this guy.
Don't you love when a drama ends so well?
Yes.
It surprises you, and yet you go, oh, we were leading to this point.
Yes.
Yep. Okay, if you could have any job for 1 year, all practical considerations aside, what job would you like to do for 1 year?
Advertising.
Advertising.
I'd like to be an advertising executive.
Because
I think I can come up with creative ways to sell crap.
this is a challenge.
Yes.
All right, we don't believe in that in this podcast. We believe in selling good stuff.
Okay.
Then
I could sell healthcare
and
policy.
Cotton candy. We don't market that.
No, okay,
It's gotta be
forget
good
that.
stuff.
It would not be that. It would just be all good stuff, like Vicks Vapo Rub.
I think they've already got their campaign with that.
But it would be better.
Yeah, it'd be better, okay. What do people get wrong about your work?
That I care who wins or loses.
Okay, great. What would they be most surprised to learn about the work of broadcasting?
How much work goes into preparing for a game.
You just don't show up and just start talking.
That's what people think.
I know it is. Who do you want me to interview next?
Oh, God. Man, that's a great question, because I would love for you to interview the guy I do my podcast with, which I do not recommend to anyone.
Okay.
My podcast, that is.
Okay.
But I would like for you to interview. Here's the thing, okay? And I'm sorry, this is not lightning.
Yep.
But it's needed to be said. People ask me on an interview show I did, who would you love to interview?
Yes.
I am interested in somebody who will be wide open and be honest.
Yes.
Tiger Woods would be my answer. But if I say, what's your biggest regret in life? And his answer is that I didn't graduate from Stanford.
Yes.
I'm done. I don't want any part of that interview.
Okay.
So it's got to be somebody who sits in this chair who's open and vulnerable.
Yeah, right. Which you've been, if I may say so.
I would like for you to interview Eddie Vedder.
Really?
Who is a dear friend of mine and is a non-believer.
I love his music. He's got an extraordinary, interesting voice.
Unbelievable story. He went through a lot. He's one of the most heartfelt, sweet people I've ever met as far as a celebrity. And I've tried to get him, and he's kind of cracking. Yeah. And when he talked about how this weird coincidence happened that allowed him to meet somebody who played in a band with his father, who he didn't know was his father until his dad had passed away. I said on the podcast, I had him as a guest, I said, did that test your atheism?
Interesting.
And it stopped him in his tracks, and he said, yes.
Interesting. Well, there's something to the guy. I mean, his lyrics are very personal
deep
and searching.
Yeah, he's very open, and I would love for him. All
right, well, you tell him that you send me his email, and we'll see if he wants to do that. Well, next time, where does he live now? I don't even know.
Seattle.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah.
All right, last question. How, by God's grace, do you think you make the world a little bit of a better place through your work?
Hopefully, through my work. I mean, forget the personal
obviously
stuff.
Loving your neighbor, loving your family.
Hopefully that's a given for everybody.
Exactly. Through your
for
work.
anybody that would sit here.
By broadcasting, how do you make the world
Hopefully
a better
people's
place?
experience of watching a big game is made more enjoyable by what I do to it. And I think if they're honest, I try to get out of the way of it, and I try to enhance the experience. That's my main thing. I don't try to make it about me. I try to make it about the game. And I hope that people, by the end of time, recognize that.
So I'm going to label something that I see in you, and that is I think you consistently dignify. You have a sense of humor. It's ironic, and it can make, people can think he's not taking it seriously. God gave you a good gift of humor. So I'm not denying that you can make a wisecrack that's entertaining.
Right.
But I think you honor the games and the players. I can't ever remember you saying anything that put anybody down. Maybe you have. I don't listen, all the time. I think I like the way you respect people. You respect the skill and the player both.
I do. And
I think that's great because it's easy to do it other ways.
Yeah, and the other ways tend to get a little bit more attention.
They can.
But I'm not interested in that, and I realize that they're doing stuff that I could never do. And
Right.
just to go back to my dad's conversation when
Yeah.
I was 19, and it's true. That's exactly what I try to do. So I'm glad at least one person knows that.
Probably more than one.
Okay.
Joe, it's been great to have you.
Thank
It's
you,
nice
Dan.
to chat with you
I just
again.
want to say this before we say goodbye. I want to thank you publicly for your friendship, for your willingness to help me through a really difficult time in my life. And I was lucky then to call you a friend. And all these years later, I'm even luckier because I know you a little bit better. But you are exactly, I am all in on people that are exactly as they portend, not pretend to be. And that's you. So this world's a better place because of you. So thank you.
Boy, thanks. And I'm glad we know each other.
Yep, me too.
All right. Thanks again.
You're going to make my mom listen to a podcast now.
If you have enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe and rate us on your preferred podcast platform. You can visit our website, the Center for Faith and Work St. Louis, at faithandworkstl.org. There you can subscribe to our podcast, sign up for our newsletter, learn about our Faith and Work cohorts, leave a message for us, and more. Here are the questions for today's podcast with Joe Buck. How does the idea of a legacy from parents or grandparents impact the way you view your work? What do you think of Joe's critique of social media? Do you ever talk on social media in a way you would not in person? Are there things we can do to use social media more ethically? We would love to hear from anyone with a high involvement in social media in their work.
Join our discussion at facebook.com/faithandworkstl or our Instagram at faithandworkstl. I'm Christina Hanna, Program Director for Center for Faith and Work.